All right, hello. Welcome to this video. My name is Matt Petrowski. Oh, what a fun time we've had doing videos here on YouTube today. Today's lesson, we're going to be taking a look at managing fields, and not surprisingly, this is a retake of the video that I just tried to shoot just before. Of course, as you're watching this, that really doesn't impact you, but what I didn't do is I didn't switch to my desktop like I had just done right there. But suffice it to say, you're here to learn about FileMaker. You are a new FileMaker learner, or you're a FileMaker intermediate, and you're wanting to basically learn more about FileMaker. So this is, I'm going to be looking off to the side and double checking that I'm actually showing my desktop that I want to, so that you can see what I'm actually showing on screen, which is a lot of stuff, hence my desktop. All right, so if you'd like to follow along, you can choose this option right here of a new solution, or excuse me, a get started. I chose the tasks solution for this particular video. If you scroll down this dialog, I am using a copy of FileMaker 16. You're going to find the task solution right here. Tasks is what I'm going to use, although it is not specific. You don't have to use tasks for this particular video. It's nothing specific to tasks that I'm doing. We're just basically learning about manage fields and all of the different areas and ways that we can manage fields. So I believe I have that in my recent, which I will just open up and bring on screen here, and we can actually learn this. I just took 20 minutes prior to right now and explained all of this, but it's good. We will be able to get into it and go through all of it. You know what? I actually need to do this myself. Let me go ahead and create a new tasks really quickly. Sorry about that. Let's go to my desktop, get rid of the task solution. That'll help me. All right, back in FileMaker. Get started, scroll down, create tasks, and there we go on my desktop. All right, so we are taking a look at all of the different ways that you can manage fields in FileMaker. By default, the easiest of all of the three that I'm familiar with is the manage database. It's the one that I learned, and it's the one that basically forces you to think about the changes that you're going to make. So within manage database, you have all of your fields, and you're able to make any changes to those. Now, in order to do that, you have to explicitly change the field. So if I have category here and I name this categories, or categories, if I can get my fingers on the keyboard correctly, I have to actually click that change button down at the bottom. So I have to intentionally click change, which is a good thing in many different situations. But because FileMaker is so flexible, FileMaker allows us to make a lot of changes anywhere or in these three places throughout our whole solution. It's good to know about these because no matter what you're doing, you can make the change right where you are at. Now, the one thing that I want to mention is when you make changes to a database, FileMaker allows you to work on a FileMaker database while it's hosted live on FileMaker server. So if that's the case, FileMaker has this thing called the catalog, or they call it, I believe internally, the catalog. And what happens is when you make changes here, if you're changing a calculation field, or you change the field type from a text field to a number field, or from one type of field to any other type of field, FileMaker has to update the database and then refresh and push all those changes out to all the rest of the people using FileMaker at that point in time. So what this does is it puts a lock on the database, and it prevents people from doing what they are working on at the time that you make the change. So you need to keep that in mind, that if you're going to do real-time production changes, you either only want to do this in a small environment or an environment where not a whole lot of people are going to be impacted. So let's take a look at all of the ways that you can actually change the fields here in FileMaker. So the first one is obvious. We've gone through the defined database, and that's the one where you're going to be able to make your changes in probably what I would consider to be the safest way. Because in the other two ways, it's a little bit too easy to actually make changes, but it's worth knowing that you can make those changes. So the second of the three ways is when you're in layout mode. So as I go into layout mode with Command or Control-Shift-L, and we bring up the field picker, I'm doing that with Command or Control-K, and you're going to find that right here in the menu system of the field picker. Now, what makes this really nice is that the field picker in layout mode is designed for us to be able to add fields to FileMaker's layout really quickly. If I want due date on here, I can simply just drag it out. And of course, down at the bottom of this particular dialog box, we have these options of field placement, where if you're dragging more than one, you get to control whether they're next to each other horizontally or whether they are vertically. Your labels, you get to control whether there's no label, a label on top, to the side, or within. And the within right here means that it's going to put in a placeholder text, and that's a newer feature that came in about FileMaker 14, I believe. Now, when it comes to what we have in the defined database, it's very clear that you add a new field and you click Create, and you select on a field, you rename it, and you click Change. The change is very explicit. Here in this particular area of FileMaker, this field picker, and let's back it off a little bit, you can click to add a new field, and that new field can be whatever you want. I'll just put in whatever right here. Now, in order to change the name of a field, once that field has been accepted, you can select on the field, and then you can click, and it will actually take a little bit of a pause, and then it'll allow you to rename that field. So again, here I can call this categories. As soon as I click out, that field will be renamed for me. Now, here's the scary part about the field picker, but it can be convenient. If we actually make our selection right here, we can change categories from text to a number, and it's really that easy. FileMaker didn't prompt me, it didn't ask for anything. If you do make a change where you change to something like a timestamp or something like that, let's see if we get a timestamp. There we go, there's a change right there where FileMaker is concerned about the impacts, and that's because it was a time and we're switching it to a timestamp. So if it previously had data in it as a time, it's now not going to match the pattern of what the field expects. And in this case, I would be able to click OK or click Cancel. So those changes or that prompt that comes up really depends on the field type that you're changing to. Now, of course, if we change categories to a calculation, FileMaker again is going to prompt us, but we're able to actually say OK, and it will bring up the Specify Calculation dialog box, and we can do it right here in layout mode. We didn't have to go into Define Database. Now, this is a modal dialog box. You'll note that we can't click behind here and actually bring layout view forward. Same thing applies to the defined database, the first of our three areas. So what else can we do here? Well, the third option that we have here is we can change the name, we can change the type, a little bit dangerous, but we can also right click and we have the ability to access the field options. That's within the defined database where you click on that button down towards the bottom of that dialog and actually click options. So clicking this and getting to this dialog is the same thing as being in defined database and selecting the field and then clicking this right here, the actual options for the field. Just a different way to access the same dialog box. So that is going to be with a right click on any of the fields within the field picker. Now, one of the things that you'll note about this particular way of editing fields is the fact that you can only edit fields within the table that you are actually, or within the layout that's tied to a table occurrence that's tied to a table that you're actually on. So in other words, this layout is based on a table occurrence that's tied to the current table of tasks. So I can only edit those fields in this table. If I switch to another table, let's say for example to the assignees, we can see quite clearly that FileMaker has these double colons. The double colons always indicate a related field from a table that's not the table based on the layout that you're actually looking at. Well, here I can click and you notice that I get no option. I can click once and wait for it to rename. I cannot. You can only rename and make changes on the current table in which that particular layout is associated to. Now I did when I was recording this earlier, or the first attempt of the bad recording, I did recognize and learned a new tip myself, which is really pretty cool. When you're selected on a particular table occurrence, whatever table is tied to that table occurrence, if you click on this link right here of the Manage Database, it will actually open up specifically to that table. That means that FileMaker is taking into account the context that you've selected here. Don't confuse that with the context of the layout. The context of this layout is the tasks table, but the context of my selection here from this pop-up menu is attachments. So when I click the Define Database, FileMaker brings me right into the attachments table. That's really pretty cool. Get out of this dialog, and if I was on the assignees and I click on the define database, look at that. FileMaker brings me right into the assignees, making it very easy for me to edit the fields that I want in this related table that's related to the tasks. So that's the second of the two places where we can actually edit and modify. We've got the single click for renaming. We've got the normal click to change the field type, dangerous. And we've got the right click where we can access field options or delete. And that's only on the current table that we're working on. The third area where you're going to be able to modify fields is within a view that is FileMaker's table view. So if you're not familiar with FileMaker, and you're becoming familiar through these videos, when we go into browse mode, these are the three views that we have access to in FileMaker. The two most common are this first one, form view, and then the second one, list view. So you're either looking at things as a list or you're looking at things as a form. The third option really doesn't make sense a whole lot of times. In fact, FileMaker leaves all of these on, I believe, in a lot of their FileMaker templates. Their templates that they provide are developed by various other developers over the course of time. So you may find that sometimes they're off, sometimes they're on. But here's my argument for when you're going to create a new layout. By default, FileMaker will enable all of these views. It does not make sense on this layout, which is designed for form view, for a user to be able to go into table view. But FileMaker wants you to learn the program, so they leave that enabled. Likewise, I can go into list view, but again, it probably wouldn't make sense on this layout. So form view is the only one that makes sense, at least to me. So let's go into layout mode and let's change that. This is what I do when I'm developing in FileMaker. If this is a form view, I only want that view as a possible view. And each new layout that you create will have all of the three options turned on. So when you go up to the layouts menu and choose layout setup, you're going to get the layout setup dialog box, and the second tab in that dialog box is views. So when we switch to that tab, you can see that we have form view, list view, and table view. Now, the default view is actually the view that I'm currently looking at when I come into this dialog box. If I go like this and I go into browse mode, so I cancel the dialog, I go into browse mode, I click on the little icon to change it to table view. I go into layout mode and I go back to that layout setup. In fact, this time I'll do it the alternate way. I'll click on below the layout itself and right click and choose the option of layout setup. Bring that up, go to views, and look at what FileMaker did. FileMaker actually defaulted to table view. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, no, FileMaker, I want this particular layout to explicitly be form view. It does not make sense to have list view, and it does not make sense to have table view. So this is the only view that I'm going to give the user the option for. So key takeaway here is, remember, FileMaker will always enable all three modes or all three views for a layout. And if only one of them makes sense, you have to go in and turn that off. Of course, once you do it, you can duplicate that layout within the Manage Layouts, which we've already taken a look at in a previous video. So once we're here, I'm going to bring up the Manage Layouts with Command-Shift-L. And now that I've got that, here is what I do. I will create a new folder, and that folder is going to be named Developer. So there with a folder named Developer, I'm going to be able to move that folder up to the top, which is where I'm going to put all of my developer-specific layouts. Now, this developer-specific layout is for me to be able to see all of my data. I am not always going to put all fields onto a layout that a user is going to be able to look at. It just doesn't make sense. There's like hidden fields, there's key fields, all kinds of fields, but I need to see those as the developer. So I'm going to create a new layout, also based off of tasks in this case, and I'm going to call this Developer Tasks. And I'm going to finish that. Now here again, I'm going to do the same thing that I did before with controlling what views this actual layout can have. Watch this. When I go into browse mode, there it is. FileMaker by default enables all of those views. I don't want them all enabled, so I'm going to right click, choose the layout setup, go into views, and I'm going to now turn this one on to say table view is the default, and I don't want form view and I don't want list view. We'll get into table view and all of the different properties that it has in the settings. But this is for me as the developer to be able to see my data behind the scenes. And here's what I do. With the field picker, I will select all. No labels are necessary. I've turned off the labels, and I'm going to drag this data in. Now, the reason I don't need labels is because in table view, FileMaker is going to show us what each of those fields are. So when I go into browse mode now, we can see all of the fields up at the top, and we can see that I cannot switch into the other views of form and list view. So here's where you get into the ability of being able to add things a little too easily, I might say, by, for example, you would think that clicking on this plus and clicking on the plus will add a new record, but you would hope that just clicking on anywhere of this area at the bottom row, would not necessarily create a record. Now it does, and I'm not too fond of that because it's so easy to accidentally click and just end up adding new records. That's just one of the downfalls that I think of table view. I don't think that I've hardly ever used it for users. Maybe you have. You can put that down in the comments if you do. Here is where we're able to add new fields. This is the third area where you can add a new field. If I wanted to add it, I just click the plus and I put whatever to. And I now have that field. Now on each of these fields, you have this little icon that when you hover, the arrow comes up and you're able to make all of the same changes that you can make in the defined database and in the field picker. So here we can go down to the bottom options of field, and here's where you can choose the field type, where we can go text, number, date, change it to whatever we want. So I want that to be a time field now. And we also have the ability to bring up all of those field options, which we have right there. Same thing as what we had in the field picker, and same thing when we're in the defined database. Delete field, we also saw that when we right-click in the field picker. But here we also have the hide field option, and this is only specific to this particular view of table view. So with field options, I can bring that up, do all the same things I would with defined database, and if I want to rename this field, I can double-click or click once. Where is it? My clicking is a little off. There we go. When I click, sometimes my mouse actually moves, and that's why that blue line's coming up. It's expecting I'm going to move this. But if I wanted to call this whatever again and just rename it, that double click allows me to actually do that. So what's really nice about this, and I'll show you why I've been showing you this, is one of the ways that I will develop is I will be developing with my actual view where I'm going to design things. So I'm get that field off, get that field off, get that field off, and I'm working in this mode. There's two different ways that I can go edit and manage these fields. I can, of course, go into Manage Database, but if I'm using a multi-window approach, and let's say I don't have the field picker on my screen, Command or Control K to get rid of that, I have yet that third option of being able to simply just open that developer window and make the changes that I want as I'm developing. And I don't have to go into the defined database and basically work in that modal aspect. If I want the whatever field name to be something different, I just go over here, click 2 times, and I just change it, another name. If I need that to be a number field, I don't have to necessarily click specifically on this little icon. I can just right-click on this field itself. With a right-click, I can change this field type. Nope, it needs to be a number. So it's the ability to make a quick change like that that is really nice when you're developing. The one shortcoming that I find is that it's a little too easy to do that here in the field picker. Being able to just simply switch this so easily to number without a prompt or having to go through multiple menus or going into defined database, make the change, and then actually think about the fact that I want the change and say yes by clicking the change button. That's something that I like, and I'm not as fond of the field picker. But I've given you the 3 options that you have here, and so I've done a better on the time of this video, and I know because I can see it over on my other monitor that you've been able to see everything that I was showing on screen, unlike the mess up video I did 20 minutes earlier. All right, so let's see if we've got any questions. Most all the responses coming in before were actually all the responses. You're just showing a blank screen. You're just showing a blank screen. All right, so we'll switch this. If you do have any questions, feel free to post those into the chat. Otherwise, there's not too much more that I have about managing fields. And if you'd like, you can ask a question pretty much about, this is a Friday for me, so it's a relaxing day. If you have any type of FileMaker question about anything, we can throw that on as a bonus or extra footage in this video. As long as it's a question not super specific to your solution, I will be able to get to that, and I'll probably start to designate some days where I can do that and go through people's solutions or go through the things that they're struggling with. All right, looks like nobody is coming up with anything for today, at least those of you who are on the stream. We lost about half of our people because of my mess up before, but that's okay. We're here and we're able to record. All right, so I think that will probably bring this video to a wrap at a good solid 20 minutes of learning about FileMaker. We'll be able to cover more as we go through FileMaker. As always, if you're interested in FileMaker, more learning about FileMaker, I have a production over at FileMakerMagazine.com. There it is on screen. Actually, no, it's not. Let me click that and bring it on screen. My bad. It is right there, FileMakerMagazine.com. You can go visit that URL if you like tips, tricks, and all kinds of little specific things about how do I do this in FileMaker, how do I do that. I've got a searchable index where you can find all kinds of different articles about things. You can see that here is a little button bar indicators. If you're not already a subscriber and you want to determine whether or not the magazine site is going to have value for you, you can click on preview on pretty much most any of the videos, and the front page is going to give you a list of those videos as well. Otherwise, if you're just looking for the free content, it's whatever I provide here on YouTube, and I'm happy to provide it to help people learn more about FileMaker. I love FileMaker. It's very empowering and helps you out a lot. And I think with that, I'm going to be able to wrap this video up unless we got a question that came in. We do have one question that came in, so let's get over to that video chat. All right, so it looks like a question came in, a question about the new layout object. Yes, Lee, go ahead and ask that, and we'll get that answered. And Ahmed, yeah, throw your questions in the chat. I am here to answer anything. We'll just stretch it out so that we go for up until most of the other videos are 40 minutes, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's see if that question's going to come in. Do you have the question? Drumroll. All right. When you rename field names, will it change in the scripts as well? Very good question, and yes, it does. FileMaker, if I didn't mention it, is very pervasive in terms of its changes, and always, here's my suggestion, if you are a new FileMaker learner, just do it and see what happens. FileMaker is very flexible. The only time that you really break things in FileMaker when it comes to fields, it's really hard to break things. But the only time that you can break things is when you name things or do things in a way that is static. And let me show you what that means. So in browse mode here, we'll open up the script workspace really quickly. We'll create a new blank script, and we'll call it testing. We're going to add one specific step, which is set field. We're going to set the field by clicking the specify target. We're going to specify the task field, which is probably the task name field. And we are going to say just a literal value of blank. So basically our script is basically taking the task name and setting it to blank. Let's go ahead and test it. We click on the run, and this new task right here, this should change to blank. And it does in fact change to blank. So let's go make our change. We've got one of the three places we can change. What do you want to use? It can be any of them. I'm going to choose option number 2, and I'll use the field picker right here. Field picker has been brought up. I'm going to click one time, or I clicked first to select, click the second time, and I'm going to call it tasking, and that change just was made. So now let's go back into browse mode. Let's go see what happened in the scripts. There we go. FileMaker changed it for us. table name is tasks, and tasking is the new field name. So that right there is the one key thing that makes FileMaker so wonderful as an environment, is that it's very flexible in terms of allowing you to change names. All right, see if we've got another question here. All right, is it possible to change the locked button used on one table to be used on a different TO? And for those of you that are FileMaker learners, if you're not familiar with FileMaker lingo, this word that's being used, or this acronym of TO, it stands for table occurrence. So if you are not familiar with this, any of these items are table occurrences, and then when you have a collection of them, it's a table occurrence group. Now that question, or excuse me, switch to that. This is what we're talking about right here. Sorry about that. Table occurrence. These are your table occurrences. This is a single table occurrence. This is a table occurrence group. Now getting back to that particular question of, you might need to clarify on that one. Is it possible to change a locked button used on one table to be used on a different table occurrence? I might need a little bit more clarification on that with regards to the question, Lee. Is it possible to change a locked button? I'm not exactly clear on where you're referring to a locked button, unless you're referring to this type of situation where we have a button on a layout. You'll have to help me along. We have a button on a layout and it does something. And it's locked, meaning I've taken the opportunity to right-click on this object, choose Arrange, and then choose Lock. Is that what you're talking about right there? A grouped button. Ah, okay. Gotcha. So the question here was a grouped button. So a grouped button in FileMaker, and we're off of the fields if you're still watching and tuning in now. A grouped button, this is actually a good question. Let's get into a little bit of FileMaker's history with buttons since we've got the question. Let me unlock this. In versions prior to this current version of FileMaker, FileMaker allowed you to create any object as a button. And now groups, let me show you the old way that you used to do things in really old versions of FileMaker. So a user would come in and they would click and they would add some text. And what FileMaker allows you to do, this is a great learning lesson for anybody who is new with FileMaker and you have to work with an older FileMaker database. This object right here is a text object. This object right here is a button. Now the old way when you would do something is in FileMaker you would actually make this object a button. And FileMaker allows you to actually make any object a button within FileMaker. So I'm going to use the inspector here in layout mode. And I'm going to make some changes to this object. I'm going to switch to the third panel, which is the appearance. And with this button, I'm just going to go down to the bottom right here, and I'm going to use my alignment. I like to make it centered horizontally and centered vertically so that it's going to actually look like a button. With this object selected, I could make it look exactly the same as this other object. But with this selected, I can actually go and I can change this under the Format menu, and I can make this object a button. Now, this is not what I would suggest that you do in modern FileMaker development, but this is what you will find in a lot of older FileMaker database systems. There are some downsides to doing this, and in particular, it comes to FileMaker's themes and its styles. But the question was, when you have a button, can you control or modify the field that particular button may go to? And so what that might look like is in old FileMaker development, let's say you had a graphic, a button might be composed of multiple pieces of information. So what I've done is I'm going to pretend that this rectangle was a graphic that I brought in from FileMaker, and then I put this text on top of this button. So FileMaker would tend to be a group of multiple objects. And we can see that when we actually group those two together, which I'm going to need to zoom out. And then I'm going to start outside of the layout here and draw a marquee around just those particular objects. So I've got 2 of them now. And I would go up, and typically what a user would do is under the arrange, you would find this option to group these options. That would be, you had a graphic object underneath, and then you would have text on top, and you would be able to assign a button. Now you would go to the format menu, and now you would choose a button setup. And with that button setup, you would then be able to choose, I want to perform a certain script, my script of whatever it's going to be. Let's choose the about scripts in this particular example. So the question would be, can I modify, if you had used a field, can I modify the field in order to, in that object that is now grouped? And the answer is yes if you're using FileMaker 16 or later. In FileMaker 15 or 14, you cannot as easily access any one given object that's part of a group of objects. It's only in FileMaker 16, and let me show you where. We can go to the View menu, and we are going to go down to the object right here of Layout Objects. This is a new palette that was added in FileMaker 16. And with this particular inspector, what we're able to see is we're able to see a collection of objects that compose a group. So when I click the little arrow here, I can see quite clearly that I have a group. Well, I have a group within a group. I have a T, which is defined as the button, and then I have a rectangle. Well, if this was a field, and this is what some developers have done in the past, is they will use a field which will change its name based on, it's a calculated field, say for example, and they've grouped it with that object. Well, when you select on the particular item in the layout panel, the new layout panel in FileMaker 16, you can now go up to the object or the format, and one of these options would actually have the field. So let me do this really quickly, real time. I'll take the phone, I'll make it the phone, and I will take this object, ungroup it, the duplicate that I made. I know I'm going really fast here. I'm going to bring that one forward. I'm going to align both of these together. Well, it doesn't really matter if I align them together. Select that one as well. Quickly group them so that we have the same situation. Can I edit that field without breaking the group, because the group is specified as a button? And let's say single step, and I'll put in beep. So this is a super simple little setup here. And yes, you can select this object with the panel, go up to the, where is it? You can control the field, and it is somewhere where you have to do it within the menus, but that's the one way that you can do that. Insert, arrange. I want to find it somewhere. Conditional formatting. There is a way to do it without actually breaking the group, and that's what we're trying to find. You may need to put that in the comments because I can't find it right now. I don't do this myself because I don't work with a whole lot of older FileMaker database systems, and anytime that I'm working on a new FileMaker system, I'll tell you what I do actually change an older FileMaker object to, since I can't find that right off the bat. Somebody will probably put it in the chat of being able to do that. I will actually take the time and change this into a button. Now this button, if I make a copy of this button and I double click and it brings up this particular setting, this old method of FileMaker where you had a graphic object behind and then you had a field or a text box on top, there's 2 ways that you can make a field the actual label for a button. The first one is a merge field. So I can merge in an actual field. Now in this case it's a related field, so I don't know what it's actually. It's probably assignments or assignee, but I'm just going to put in tasks. This merge field right here will actually merge in the actual task name if that's what the actual theme. I renamed it to tasking, so I would need to change that. Double click and bring it tasking. As long as you get the name right on a button, then it'll actually work. So you can see right here that this particular button is now using that task name. So whatever it is, this button is going to change as soon as I accept that field. And you can see right there that it did. But the best way, if you're using in FileMaker 16, the best way to convert any older FileMaker buttons is to use a single segment button bar. And by that, what we have is this object right here is this button bar. Drag that out. FileMaker will default to 3, at least in this version of FileMaker 13. Get rid of all of them. And this is typically what I use as my end-all be-all of buttons. And here's why. This one object is relatively the same as FileMaker's button tool. So here's our button tool. Here's our button bar tool. These are pretty much the same, but because this is a newer object in FileMaker, this one has more power integrated into it. And by that, I mean that we have access to FileMaker's calculation engine, which we're going to take a look at in another video. So I would be able to style this so that it's not black, but when I double click and bring up the button bar setup, this, as opposed to actually changing the label of a button to reference a field using these merge fields, I can actually just click and say, what field do I want to be the label of this? And I just say, I want it to be the tasking field. And so this now is the same thing as what we have with its neighbor right next to it. When we go into browse mode, we can see that both of these are the same. They're both buttons. This one's a button bar with a single segment. This one is a standard button with a merge field. This is a grouped object right here. I suggest breaking up your grouped objects and taking advantage of the power that you have here. And it's only if you have a graphic object that you know needs to be the background of a button that you keep using that older method. And this button, by the way, it is not a grouped object. It is an actual object. We can see that right here. Well, that object right there in the button bar, I just need to close them down. Here in the layout objects, any object that does not have that little triangle next to it in FileMaker 16, that is an object that stands on its own. So this particular object is not grouped in any way. If it was, it would show this little indication that it's part of a grouped object. In fact, FileMaker even gives us little indication that the old way of creating buttons was to group them with multiple elements, and it even shows a little mini button right there. I'd take the time and break those apart and change them. If it's a large solution, I know it's painful, but you get a lot of advantages. A grouped button does not take advantage of styles in the same way that a regular button does. When I have this tasking button selected right here, and I bring up the inspector palette with Command or Control I, this button right here gives me the ability to have the normal, the hover, the pressed, and the in focus states. This button object, which is grouped right here, we can see that it's a group. FileMaker tells us this, but we only have the normal state, meaning you cannot control the hover color when a user hovers over this grouped object defined as a button. So that's why when you convert all of your other objects to objects that give you more control and allow you to take advantage of FileMaker's power, that's where you get the cool factor, as opposed to just leaving it. So, yep, we'll take a little bit of time. That was a nice long answer to that question. I hope it gave everybody who's watching a lot more information or insight, especially if you've been working with FileMaker for any length of time. All right, so I think that's probably going to give us a wrap for this. I never like to go over 30 minutes, and it looks like Lee mentioned, thank you. I was hoping I wouldn't have to make them over from the older file, and unfortunately, yes, that is the case. You do have to convert anything that FileMaker has put in that's new. You have to convert it to the new. The old just won't work anymore, and there's really no automated way. You just have to go layout by layout and make all of those changes in order to switch to the newer ways of working with FileMaker if you've got an older FileMaker database. All right, so I think that's going to give us a wrap. I'm so glad that we figured out that the video I was just shooting on the startup screen in the previous one. If this is your first time watching this video, of course, if you want more information, go check out that FileMaker magazine. Otherwise, what we're going to do, switch to that. And if you'd like to be notified, you can subscribe by clicking the icon here in YouTube, and YouTube will notify you. Otherwise, the new video will show up right here. All right, thanks a lot, and until the next video, see you later.